Yeah, I just gotta just like this the whole time? Okay. Perfect. Okay. I think we're gonna get started. So thank you everyone for coming. This is the only slide I have. I just wanted you guys to have lunch. So what?
I take back 5 of the bad things I said to you.
All right, we got like 75 to go. So we're talking about cloud engineering, but at first we're going to do a little housekeeping of an email that got sent out a couple months ago. So there's an email from Brent, rest his soul. Is that? Basically, the DevOps team was having a lot of changes. So we're going to kind of go over some of those changes because there's been a lot of questions. I mean, we had a town hall last week, and that question was brought up, and we're going to answer it. So added kind of, because DevOps isn't going away. The DevOps team is kind of going away. So before DevOps teams, and from my experience, it's not scalable. Also, DevOps is typically not a set of tools. It's more of a concept, an idea, a way we interact with each other. DevOps originally was not a certification. You can get certifications in DevOps. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. So these are kind of some original concepts that DevOps was created about. Was the relationship between development and operations, or development and infrastructure, bringing those communications together, removing silos. So DevOps is about cross-functional teams over organizational silos. This next one, I kind of copied these from an older slide. I don't necessarily personally agree with this. I think they're both important, but automation over documentation. I mean, if we have a run book to fix something and we read through it, that's fine. But if we have that automated, that's even better. Knowing good software doesn't end with development and release is another concept of DevOps. So just kind of want to talk about that, give a little insight on what's in my head when we talk about DevOps. And anyone who's worked with me a lot knows that at this point, I feel like DevOps is a 4-letter word because it's just not used the way I personally think the industry should have done it, but that's changed. So large team, large responsibilities, the team wasn't so large. So you got these things, these boxes here. The software development lifecycle tooling, things like Jenkins, Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, you name it. Middleware, we have Tyke, we have Nginx, we have Kafka, we have databases, AWS, Google Cloud, now our internal cloud as that gets built out, Kubernetes. We're also a dev shop help desk, and I could keep going, but I ran out of room on the slide. There's still a lot of things that DevOps was owners of, so you can see that doesn't really scale well for a single team. So the New World Order, what Brent sent out with that email kind of discussed how we're breaking into 3 teams. So the reason for that was to have smaller teams with a narrow focus. We had efforts like FreeIPA, ForgeRock, I guess internal DNS is the big one that we were focused on that, but we also have so much tech debt and so much day-to-day work that no progress was getting made. So I had to jump over here, Brett had to jump over here, Tyler had to go over here, and it was just a constant reaction to things instead of being proactive. So we're going to split the teams apart and narrow their focus. The other big change, which happened after that email was sent out, we made the decision to move the engineering enablement group back to the engineering org. So they're closer to the developers, and we'll go into a little details on what they should be responsible for. Currently, I think our staff is 0 in Scottsdale for this team technically. We have Eder in Guadalajara, we have Evgeny and Anton in Kiev, and we still need to figure out exactly who's going to take on that ownership here, new people, how that's going to roll out. And Adam, technically, he's not here. Where's Adam? Is Adam out of town?
Not here.
Adam, where are you? Adam. Adam technically should be the one to talk to about that long term, but also when that email rolled out, I don't think we did a good job communicating. It wasn't, email goes out, all these changes are live now. It should have been, this is where we're going, here's the plan to get there. We never really took that step. That's why those questions kept coming up in town halls and hoping to get those answered here. We'll do Q&A at the very end, so I don't think this is going to take much time. So who owns what? So the engineering enablement team, I could have just put like CI/CD. That's what I envisioned when we talked about separating these teams. But there's going to be, pipelines was owned by the DevOps team. There was a team in Kiev that wrote most of it, focused it on Python, added Java later. Ultimately, that team's going to decide the fate of that. If I was making that decision, I wouldn't have a single pipeline for every language. I would probably have a language-specific pipeline for each thing. But they're going to drive that themselves. They should also be removing development roadblocks, so things like the Nginx deployment failing this morning in dev, which Devin, I think, was looking into. Long-term SSH access. Brett is currently working on a way to tie that into our LDAP server to where it should just be managing it in a UI instead of having to run some Ansible role that may or may not work in 100 different times. Assist adding new apps to environments. Specifically, that's probably talking about the cloud app thing that we have. We have this repository for our Kubernetes configurations that are specific for applications. The teams are absolutely doing a good job today, but I still think they should be assisting in that. We have a lot of Confluence documents that help with that already. Troubleshooting, troubleshooting with the dev team. So my vision in the conversations we had with James and Brent while he was here was that if we move them closer to the dev teams, we can potentially fix that scalable issue of we embed them to begin with, and then eventually as we keep growing, we might turn into having a DevOps person per team, maybe a DevOps person for every other team, however that scale works. And long term, I feel like that would be a better plan. So the other main thing that you see here in the middle is we have a ton of middleware. If you've worked in our stack at all, you've probably recognized that. There is a lot of things out there, and dev teams would add a new one. They'd want to use Rabbit a certain way, and everything would just keep funneling into this DevOps team, even though we knew nothing about it. We didn't know what apps were using it. We don't know how to maintain it. So having a middleware team, we should have them focus on making sure we have good Tyke automation, even though that thing should be thrown off the building. Good Kafka automation, which Theo is actually going to be working on some automation to help us be able to quickly spin up auto-scaling Kafka clusters in AWS, and then long-term we'll be able to reuse some of that automation in JWS, which I'll get into later, or NPC, I like to call it, Nextiva Private Cloud. Nginx is a big, Nginx and Tyke are very important. I mean, all of these things are important. If one of them's down, we're most likely in trouble. But Nginx is not in a good state. And again, that was something that we tried to have someone focus on, but we kept getting pulled multiple directions, so that full focus and attention that things like Nginx need was never happening. So the dream of this is to get this team staffed, which right now it's we have an individual named Tyler. I'm calling him Tyler 3.0, which 1.0 is no longer with us and 2.0 is not here, so I don't know where he is. But are the DBAs part of that group still, James?
Yes.
So the DBAs, we have Jim, Raghu, Theo, and Carlos in Guadalajara. I keep moving too far, don't I? And so that should be their primary focus, is just middleware. So those individuals shouldn't get pulled into pipeline issues. They shouldn't get pulled into my repo needs to be created, or I need to have a user created in Jenkins, or LDAP, I should say. So they should be able to just focus on middleware, the things that they know how to work on, and help make sure those are stable, make sure we can reproduce them, recreate them on the fly when we need to, long term. So that leads us to the third group, which is cloud engineering, which is what this big talk is going to lead into. So some things that we were already focused on is the AWS infrastructure from the VPC level to the EC2 instance. So the virtual private cloud network to each EC2 instance, the RDS instances. Right now, that team is owning all of that. Kubernetes cluster management will be, so this one doesn't mean we own the whole thing. The parts that we actually own is still not defined, and we're still working through that with Eric. But that will be a main focus of ours, is making sure that that's successful. This should be indented. Maintaining cloud platform repo and the cloud general repo. So today we have 3 main repositories in the cloud project in Bitbucket. Cloud general is the automation, the Terraform automation for our VPCs. So it creates our VPC, our subnets, our security groups, route tables, and it also has some fanciness that automatically associates a new VPC with our direct connect that connects us from AWS into the data center. Cloud platform is everything after that at the moment. I want to break that down into smaller pieces, but we might get into that in this chat. But right now that spins up our Kubernetes cluster, as well as deploys things like RDS instances, S3 buckets, Lambda functions if we use them. So that thing's still like a monolithic, not broken down as well as I'd like to. So this is the team. So now that we're done with why DevOps is changing, we'll go into kind of what we're doing. Myself, Brett, Dev, and Kyle, small little team. And so one of the things that I want to, I guess I'm going to open my mouth and commit myself to, is I want to regularly broadcast, communicate to the company what we have in progress and what we're going to finish. I think that's something that we've historically not done well. So this is my first effort. These are things we are working on. So right now, primarily Brett has been working on our new LDAP. Existing LDAP server is not really in a good state. We wouldn't want to add extra things to it. It's not highly available. The new server is highly available, completely secure. It also will handle user SSH access in the legacy data center. So we're trying to roll this out to where we can hand over the keys to the dev managers or whoever we approve to go in there and manage. Theo has access to server X, server Y. Now Theo doesn't, so I remove it. So you think I obey the law? So that there's a lot of fanciness with that. Also, long term, we might be able to pull it off, but we don't have single sign-on for everything. We have, right now Jenkins, Nexus, SonarQube, Splunk have the same login, but Atlassian doesn't. So this might long-term tie into that if we can do that. But the main point was we were trying to solve the cluster that was FreeIPA, if anyone knows the history. I don't want to go too much into that. We failed to roll out FreeIPA for many reasons. So this will help solve that. Also, we still don't have very good internal DNS, if we have any at all. So Devin's been working along that path of a highly available Power DNS that we can use for our internal DNS solution. And once that's done, we do have a small but important dependency on FreeIPA today. Once that's done, we should be able to kill FreeIPA, pretend like it never happened. Kyle is working on improving Nexus 3. So this is one of those showing the skeletons in your closet thing. Our current Nexus server is a VM in the data center that has Nexus 2, Nexus 3 on it, some weird proxy that makes the same domain work for these different applications on different ports. And then also, we use Nexus for our Docker registry, but we don't use a trusted certificate. So every single person in here that's used our Docker registry knows the craziness that you have to do just to be able to log in and pull images. That will be gone soon. Kyle actually has this done and working. My laziness of writing a nice email and rollout plan is what's stopping that from going out at this point. And then AWS security patching. So that's something else that we are completely owning since we are driving this. Well, we have a lot of AWS accounts, so I should say the engineering AWS account. Everything that's in there that shows up on security team's vulnerabilities, we are in charge of patching. Long term, everything should be able to be just torn down and spun up with a new image. So there is no patching. We're not there. There's certain things. There's decisions made by the company to stand up the sales demo environment in there. Those things are static, so we do have to patch those instead of just replacing them. I'm personally have this weird itch to reduce our cost of AWS. I've just purchased 75 reserved instances for Kubernetes. So that roughly is our full Kubernetes stack in all VPCs, all environments. It will grow, but as we move to JWS or Nextiva Private Cloud, I didn't want to go overboard. Got approval from Josh to do a year. I'm going to keep finding things, do a year. RDS will probably do some reserved instances. Roughly, that saves us probably 30 to 40% on the bill. It could have saved us more if we did 3 years and paid for them all up front, but I don't think we wanted that huge payment up front for that. So those are some of the things we're working on. So this is what we have on deck. So in our spare time, while everyone's doing what they're already assigned to, we're all kind of evaluating our current implementation of Kubernetes. Right now we have this dependency on KOps or COPS, which is Kubernetes operator or operations. And it, from what we've seen, isn't the best solution for us. The main reason I say that is they just released, it's open source, it's actually ran by the Kubernetes, or what's that word I'm looking for, community. They just released 1.13, which matches the version of Kubernetes. Kubernetes is on 1.15 already, but if you're using KOps, you can't go to 1.15. You're limited to be at 1.13, which is already 2 releases behind. And they just released 1.13. We're on 1.11. So we're 4 versions of Kubernetes behind. So that's something we're evaluating to figure out long-term. Do we find something else? Do we use Kube ADM? Do we use something else homegrown that allows us to be closer to the latest release of Kubernetes? Upgrade to Terraform 12. We are currently on 11. This actually is in progress since I made this deck, and will be finished on Monday when we do the latest deploy to AWS. What that buys us is just we're on the latest Terraform. There's a lot of cool features that they've added that we'll be able to take advantage of as we write some of our infrastructure as code. And then I already kind of talked about we're on 1.11 Kubernetes. These are kind of my goals for like the next 90-day thing. At least 1.12. It would be nice to get closer to 1.15. If we're going to keep up with this microservice world and constantly roll things out, I'd like us to be closer to the latest release of Kubernetes. As Kubernetes constantly adds new features, makes it more reliable, that should allow us to be, more cool. Separate Kubernetes deploys from AWS infrastructure deploys. So today, if a dev team wants to add an RDS instance or needs a change to a security group because there's something they need opened up in the data center we didn't think about, the release cycle is about 2 weeks to get from pull request into our cloud platform repository into production. I would like to see that be same day if the change makes sense. So if we separate the infrastructure deploys, which is the Terraform, and we separate the Kubernetes things, I think that'd be an easier way to do that. Some of the reasons why that decision was made originally was we're adding things constantly to Kubernetes, tooling to Kubernetes like Prometheus, Grafana, alerts, Elastic Cloud things like Elasticsearch and Kibana and Grafana, all those Banas. So Kubernetes, we wanted to have things kind of bake in dev, make sure it doesn't break the cluster. Then we have it bake in QA for a little bit and then bake in prod. But there's some things that just doesn't make sense to do that. A small configuration change to an app in production because Elasticsearch doesn't have enough memory, we should be able to do right away. So those are some of the things that separating that would help us. And then work on deck is the NPC, the Nextiva private cloud or non-player character, JWS, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so that was a lot of information. So it's time for more interesting stuff that I think's interesting, that you guys might not, but I don't know what you guys find interesting. So that's my humor. So, excuse me. Data center deployments use Ansible today. If anybody has done any maintenance in the release management repository, you can get lost. It's very confusing. You have to know which folder to go into to get to our role-based playbooks. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but there is a right way, closer to a right way to use Ansible, and it's not how we're using it today. So what we're trying to focus on and what we've started to move to are single role repos that allow you to use these Ansible roles similar to in Maven or in Python, the way you add a requirement or add a dependency. You want to make them generic. The very first one that Brett did, and we did it successfully, was our new Java role. It actually works on Debian or CentOS, and it works for Java 8 or 11 based on how you pass in some variables to it. So that role exists. That allows us to use that role as a dependency to our new Tomcat server role. So anytime you call the Tomcat server role, it already knows it has to install Java, and it does that prior to running its own steps. So there is a pattern that Ansible created using Ansible Galaxy, and it's very similar to just Maven clean install, pulling in your dependencies. We have a dedicated project now in Bitbucket called Ansible that has those roles in it. It's starting to get populated over time. I will want to completely delete all the other Ansible. I'm not going to do that because that's aggressive and probably will cause things to break and will take a long time. But this is one of those things where we want to set an example and a standard, I guess. It's kind of maybe too far, but to allow the development shop and infrastructure and anyone that needs to use these roles to contribute and be part of that part of the organization. By no means should this be owned by cloud engineering. Absolutely shouldn't be. It should be owned by all of us, even though we might be using them more than others, or infrastructure might be using them more than dev long term. But that's just, we're trying to build an example of that. So if you haven't used Ansible Galaxy or dynamically pulled in roles into your playbooks, it's pretty similar to the way, like I already said, Maven and Python do it. So you define, this is a requirements text file, which is the same as Python. They have a requirements text file, and has a list of our requirements. So in here you can see we have the Ansible install Nextiva repos, we have base patching, we have local users, and Java. So this is an example of just basic things that a server might need. At first, we're adding in the Nextiva repositories, which is like our yum install or our Debian package install. And then base patching is something that we created for AWS, the base things that we do to an image before we let any team use an AMI. Ansible local users adds Jenkins user, it adds the DevOps users, the SRE users. Long term, that role could have been used to add every individual as needed, but I think we want to move to, like I said earlier, that LDAP solution. And then Ansible Java, that's what we do there for Java. And you can see there's versions on some of them, and I left this one out on purpose so you can see that there's an option. The way that works is these are all Git repositories. So it's going to look at tags first, or it just looks for a branch because it's Git. So that's a branch or the tag of v1.0.0. So I know that 1.0.0 of Ansible Java works, and I can make changes to that repository and break it, but that will still work. So you can be locked on a version of a role just like you can a release of a library in Python or a release of a library in Java. And then the local users, when you go with this approach, you're taking the risk that someone might have pushed something to break to the default branch in that repository. Most of the time that's not going to happen, but it does. Or there might be some non-backwards compatible changes that someone pushed, which causes your playbook to fail. So I personally like the versions, but seeing either way is absolutely fine. And then this is as simple as it is to install it. Ansible Galaxy comes with Ansible. When you install Ansible locally, Ansible Galaxy CLI comes with it. Install it similar you do with Python. So we're going to go into Packer a little bit later, but I wanted to show why I think this is pretty powerful. We use Packer to make AMIs. We can make VM templates with it too. So you have these provisioners, and the first thing it's doing is it's installing the roles. The second thing it's doing is it's executing the playbook. So instead of having to have all my roles in the same repository as that this Packer build uses, they're all external. All I have to do is manage my Packer file, and it just makes it reusable. So we're using this in Packer. We can use it in Jenkins to do just Ansible playbooks, and we can use it in Terraform as well. So you can see when we're using Ansible that way, these roles are no longer just, I created this role so I could do a Spring Boot deploy in the data center. We're not thinking of it that way. I'm creating this role so I can do a Spring Boot deploy anywhere, is what the idea should be. So that brings me to the next fancy tool that we've been using is Terraform. So Terraform is an open source infrastructure as code software tool. Multi-cloud support. It has providers as AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, OpenStack, VMware. There's a ton of them. Those are just probably the most popular ones. Terraform has this concept of modules that make it easy to have identical environments. So I can use a module here with different variables, spin up environments. This one's called dev, this one's called prod. They're exactly the same except for their IP addresses and their ACLs probably. Also a dedicated project for the modules that we are creating. So we're probably going to keep iterating on this, but right now we have an AWS network module. Probably should have been called VPC module. I think actually, I'll go into more detail there because I actually have a slide that shows that. And Terraform modules, a module is a container for multiple resources that are used together. Can be referred to, so this is similar to the Ansible roles where these can be referred to externally. So Ansible roles, we're writing these things that could be used over and over and over again, just like a Java library or Python library. Same thing with the Terraform module. So you can see we're really trying to think of things as infrastructure as code, as we're actual software engineers engineering infrastructure as code, and not just writing a script, having it execute, maybe changing the script for the next environment. Try making it really reusable, real easy, real simple, real quick. So again, just like Ansible, you can refer to a specific branch or a tag version of the module. Here's an example of our AWS network module in dev. So the source line shows the Git repo it's pulling it from, references version 1.0.0, and variable overrides. I actually simplified this yesterday to strip out all of this because it was the same every time we called it. Our site 1, site 2, and site 3 IP addresses don't change. And if they do change, we'll go change it in the module. So you can see here we have these two things. Sorry if I'm going off camera, but VPC name and the prefix for the cider, is that how you say it? Cider. That's a drink, right?
Yes.
Cider block. So 10.81, that VPC is going to be 10.81.0.0/16. So instead of that whole thing being out there, we just are overriding the prefix. We're just saying 10.82, 10.83, 10.84 every time we call this module, and changing the name of the VPC. So that's, again, it's repeated. We have 6, I think, VPCs today. So this block is just repeated in our Terraform 6 times with the variables being changed. So this tool's underrated, in my opinion. Packer is another HashiCorp product. So is Terraform. As I started my journey into Docker, I thought this thing was going to be like thrown to the curb and you don't need it anymore. Everything is going to be in Docker. It's not the case. It is still needed. So it's really like, this is pulled from their website. It's modern. It's automated. Packer is easy to use and automates the creation of any type of machine image. It embraces modern configuration management. So you could use Chef, you could use Puppet, you can use Ansible, you can use Bash scripts, you could use whatever you want to provision these machines. So Packer has this concept of builders. So the builder you'd think of as EC2, VMware, VirtualBox, I guess whatever Google calls their images. And then there's provisioners. So in the power in this to me is that I have right now AMIs that we make for AWS. Brett wrote these Packer builds originally and wrote that base patching Ansible role for AWS. But we wrote it in a way that when we move to JWS or NPC, whatever it's called long term, we're going to be able to pull 99% of that and reuse it to make VM templates. The thing that we're going to change is the builder. The provisioner is going to be the same. It's just going to say, let me define my builder block. I'm going to create a VM template, and then I'm going to use this Ansible to create it. So that's why I think this is just a super powerful tool. If we wanted to go into a world where we were multi-cloud, where we had Google Cloud, we had AWS, we had our data center, it would be really easy for us to just say, I'm going to recreate this Packer build by just changing the builder. And so that's where, to me, it's very powerful. So I thought I had an example of code of that, but I don't. OK, so that was just me kind of showing some tools. The main thing is we're using Ansible, Terraform, and Packer right now for a lot of our infrastructure as code. None of those things lock us into a single cloud provider. So it gives us the flexibility to shift from AWS to Google Cloud to our own private cloud with minimal effort. So this part is, how do you engage with our team? The beginning, we're talking about how the teams have shifted, and everyone used to go to DevOps support for everything. Now there's like 3 chat rooms. So engaging with us, so things that you would engage with us are, if you want to use a service in AWS like S3, Lambdas, RDS, their Redis clustering, you would come to us for that. Most likely they'll be denied. Those are a thing. I can't think of the word. Special cases for using Lambda for one of the projects. I think it was file upload. It just made sense. Lambda was the right tool. Recreating that in the private cloud, we'll figure that out when we get to it. But Lambda was the right tool, so we allowed the team to use Lambda and help them with that. So long term, when we get into the private cloud, feature requests will come to us for new things that the dev teams think they need that would make their lives easier and improve the way that they're building VMs and how we get down to that whole song and dance when we get there. Kubernetes troubleshooting. So what we'll want when the engineering enablement team is up and running in full force, we'll want them to try to troubleshoot first. So high level Kubernetes, like, oh, my app's not deploying, can you help me look at the logs? I looked at the logs, I don't know what's going on. That should go to that team, but if they run into roadblocks, it should get escalated to us. AWS server access, we're still figuring this out long term, but that needs to come to us. And then where you engage, there is a cloud support Slack chat room, and then cloud engineering has its own Jira project, so you can put tickets in there. Again, if they're service requests or feature requests, they may be denied, but there'll be a conversation about it for sure. Contributing. So, talked about DevOps not being scalable as a team. And the only way I feel like that is scalable is if the whole organization contributes to all of this as much as possible. So we talked about cloud platform and cloud general, cloud apps, repositories. Everyone should be able to feel free to say, I want to try out this feature in my local Kubernetes or in a sandbox Kubernetes, and they need to get it into the cloud platform repository. We may add it, we may approve it, but we may not enable it in dev or prod. But it could be there for people to use. And then hopefully we evaluate it and decide if we're going to use it or not. A good example of the way contributing to our team is, I believe it might not be for CoSpace, but one of the teams in Kiev is needing a Mongo database in AWS. What's that? It is CoSpace. So instead of us dropping what we're doing and supporting them and creating the right automation for the Mongo database, we're enabling them to create the Ansible role. So we're saying, you create the Ansible role, you get it working, I will show you how to add it into our automation and get it into AWS. So to me, that is DevOps. That is DevOps to me, is you want this feature, you're gonna help your team get it, you're gonna learn about it while you're doing it, and you're gonna hand it over to us, and we're gonna make sure it goes into the world the right way it should. So even though he's still close to the team, Theo's doing the same thing with Kafka right now. So we're going to have Theo write some Kafka automation, and we're going to move it into our Terraform and our automation. And I want to see that more often. And I think we'll be able to get through things quicker, and it'll just be better. So that was pretty quick, huh? Oh, I didn't start the timer. So that's all I have. Originally wanted to talk a lot more about like how to enable us, but I wanted to cover the DevOps changes too. So any questions about that? Any questions about what we're working on or where we're going? Anything? Anything in Guadalajara?
So there was some talk about creating templates a few months ago for deploying applications. Is there maybe like
I don't know what that means. Templates.
Yeah, like Jenkins files or like a standard procedure for.
Is that for new applications?
Yeah, for new
I think that's the work
applications.
Tyler was in.
Oh, yeah. So Tyler was working on a web-based, I guess there was an API that you'd call, it would create your repo, it would create whatever language, a skeleton of your language. It wasn't finished. He's no longer on the team. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I think that's something that we'd want to chat with Adam about, maybe. I know Matt really wanted that. But that's, again, like...
So on the Java side, we kind of handled some of this more in the guild for the different languages. But on the Java side, Flex started an archetype there that kind of does a lot of what you just talked about, kind of. So there's different ways to do it than what kind of Tyler did. But he did have kind of a working demo of a Python side.
Yeah, and so just in case...
And Fleck actually finished that. Right?
Yeah, the Java side. I mean, it's not the full thing that he did, but it's a good chunk of getting people started really quick.
Yeah, it'll set up your project, but it won't do kind of like all the other stuff, like adding like Kubernetes configs,
Right.
and that, or like creating a repo.
So,
Business logic code formula. I know, I haven't used it for the SMS service.
so to reiterate that for everyone in Guadalajara, Matt Fleck, Josh Fleck, Josh wrote an archetype in Maven to quickly create Spring Boot projects. The idea long term was to have that added to Tyler's tool so that Tyler's tool could do the creating the new repo, adding the Jenkins file, adding the Jenkins job, setting up permissions in Bitbucket correctly and all of that. But that type of collaboration was missing. The DevOps team wasn't engaging well enough with the dev teams, or the dev teams weren't involved. So we never got to that point because, again, when I talked about earlier about us getting pulled multiple directions, but that's where we wanted to go with that for sure.
For the, you said AWS request would be denied, most likely. Do you mean specific AWS services would be denied, or things getting deployed to AWS?
Specific services, not things being deployed. So specifically is if a team wanted to start using ECS, even though we're using Kubernetes, things like that, like or I want my
RDS instead of using something in Kubernetes to spin up Postgres.
Well, we are using RDS today. We made that decision. We made the decision to use RDS as databases because whenever we're going to migrate to the private cloud, we're going to have to do a database migration. There's no like, just move it over, just push a button and it goes over. And whether it was an RDS or EC2 instance didn't matter. There's less for us to manage in RDS because it does it for us. S3 we're using. I think that would be something that everything that we looked at has somewhat of a tool to mimic S3. So we'll be able to have like an S3 equivalent in the private cloud. RDS, I guess, because it'll be on-demand databases, but yeah.
So we have a question from Guadalajara. That
I can't say it that way.
Do we have a plan for CDN?
That's the requested for that.
It's an awfully timely.
Yeah, those, real quick.
You're live right now.
I don't know what that means. So.
I don't know if I have
Next
the
question.
I don't know if I have.
There's going to be some discussions on CDN, so.
Yes.
We don't have a plan.
We don't have a plan. There should be. I'll leave it at that.
You mean yet, right? You don't have a plan yet?
I don't have a plan. So the original plan was to start using CloudFront in AWS. And again, that is a service that we would be locking ourselves into, not cloud agnostic. So I don't personally think it's a bad idea, but we need to do it right if we're going to do it as well. Is that it?
I guess, I don't know.
Any other questions?
I have another one.
Yay!
What kind of cloud alternatives are you considering for long term besides AWS?
Oh, the company is deciding to build out a private cloud, and that's what we call JWS. It's either Josh or James Web Services. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who's won that battle. I like to call it the Nextiva private cloud because that JWS. NPC seems better to me. But so yeah, so there's a group of very important people that are meeting with a lot of vendors right now to figure out our long-term new data center. I don't want to go into much detail about that because I'm a sidekick on that project right now. That's more Eric and James and Josh Lesavoy's domain. I'm just like listening and learning. But yes, so AWS isn't going away yet.
Okay.
So we will build out our private cloud. We will move things out of AWS to our private cloud. The cloud engineering team is going to keep the flexibility to where catastrophe happens in our 2 data centers simultaneously across the country, that we still have that flexibility to quickly spin back up into AWS. So that's kind of why I was talking about all of those tools being very flexible, and they are cloud agnostic, even though we have to write some extra code to make it that way. But we want to have that flexibility long term. I think that's all I have to say about that, Matt.
Do you guys have a prioritized list of like kind of the platform as a service stuff that you'd be building once we get into kind of private cloud?
Do you work here?
You guys gotta get a plan.
So the way that is happening is we're going to get the hardware first, and that is all we're worried about. We're actually going to take it in chunks, and we're going to get the hardware installed in the 2 data centers. We're going to get the network working, and then after that, we'll start working on the platform as a service, if you want to call it that. Yeah, that's a good name for it. Ruth?
How can devs contribute to pipelines development?
So that long term will be something that Adam and Maxine should be driving as we get more mature in these new teams, and engineering enablement completely moves back to engineering. However those teams unfold, they should be driving those changes. Obviously, there's a lot of knowledge. Well, not really. I think the knowledge of that library is still around. There's a few of them that aren't, but we'll still support it for the time being. I'm not necessarily worried about adding new features to it. I personally am like, private cloud and AWS is enough. So that's something that as Eder, Evgeny, Anton, hopefully 2 people in Scottsdale that Adam figures out, those individuals can work together and decide, do we want a single pipeline? Do we want to do a version 2 of pipelines? Are we okay with pipelines? Or are we just going to scrap it and start over? Personally, want to be out of that discussion for many reasons, because I'm opinionated. So I'm punting that answer, I guess.
Another one, is TIC still the future solution for API gateway?
I don't think TIC was ever the future solution for API gateway.
Is it the current solution?
It's the current solution. Again, that's like one team, too many responsibilities. Could we have prioritized TIC, TAC over anything else? Yeah, and got rid of it. I don't think there's anyone in this building or in Kiev or in Guadalajara that wants TIC to still be a thing.
So I can jump into on that one. So API gateway, with what type performs today, like that it will be going away. We're trying to figure out kind of what it all provides and what other tools that we have, like Nginx, that we could also start leveraging. So if you go look at or talk to everyone in this room, what is an API gateway? Everyone's going to have a different opinion on what that means.
Yup.
There's a group, an architecture group, that we have different people throughout the organization a part of that's helping come up with some of this type of information that will get shared at some point of what type gets replaced with in the future.
But I think the fact that Matt can answer that question and not me is 100% where we need to go.
Yay!
Is Matt's teams are working and using these tools. They're the ones feeling the pain. We might get the support tickets, but we don't know. Like a lot of the times, like tickets would come into DevOps and be like, hey, I have a problem with app something in Nginx, and we're going to be like, okay, let me go learn app something in Nginx and figure out how it was configured 6 months ago. And so the fact that we're not making that decision of API gateway is going away, it's just going to authenticate through TIC and or through Nginx. We could make that decision, but are we the right people? It's kind of always been my thing. Robert, do you have a joke to tell us?
No, I was going to start quiet.
Robert, do you have somewhere to go? I can talk longer if you just want to leave. I'm done. I don't have anything else to say. It's kind of hot up here.
So no more questions from Guadalajara.
Thank you for the questions. I tried.